Okay, welcome everyone to the Minchat shir. We're continuing with Mitzva Yud Aleph in Yud Beis. I don't know if I'll get to Yud Beis tonight. Mitzvah is dealing with the possession of Chametz. And those of you who were here for the first part of the class last week know that the issue of Chametz on Pesach is almost a pretext. We're not really learning the halachas. As I always give a caveat before I begin my classes, we never learn halacha l'maisa in a Minchat class. Always, just studying Talmudic and halachic theory. But in particular, this couple of classes is more about defining ownership than it is about chametz per se. It's a good test case, if you will, to make our minds a little bit more facile and a little more subtle about recognizing components and characteristics of ownership. But that's really where we're going tonight. Okay, before I begin, I was a little bit remiss. As always, I want to thank TorahAnytime.com for typing the shir and making it available to many more people than those physically attending tonight. May Hashem grant tremendous bracha and atzlacha b'ma'aseh yadayim and hafatzas haTorah in dissemination of Torah. And as always, I want to dedicate the Torah that we're learning tonight to the refuah shleima of Hayalda Soya Chaved Bas Chana Masha, and also to the Chayla Avram Chaim Ben Chasha. To those of you who will be watching on TorahAnytime.com, as I always do before I begin this year, there's more or less an in-text shir, unlike some of my other lectures. So if I'm looking down at the book rather than up at the camera, please forgive me, but that's the nature of these shiurim. And if you ever want to follow along, we use the Machon Yerushalayim print of the Minchat Chinuch. It's Chelik Aleph, and it begins on page Nun and Nun Aleph. Okay, so just a quick synopsis, because I see that there are quite a few people here who weren't here last week. Without reviewing the whole shir last week, but just to go over something a couple of points that kind of shocked people last week. And that is that there are sugyas in Shas, there are discussions, topics discussed at great length all over the Talmud about things that we wouldn't immediately associate with ownership, that there's arguments in the Gemara whether or not they constitute ownership. So let's think about ownership for a moment, okay? You ask the average person, what does it mean that I own something? So the first thing that they'll say is usage. I'm the one who gets to use it without having to ask another person permission. That's obviously the first litmus test of ownership, which immediately creates a conundrum for this mitzvah of the Torah that we're learning. And that is as follows. Okay? There are things prohibited by the Torah for ingestion. You're not allowed to eat, machalos asuros. And then there's a whole other category of prohibitions called isurei hana. Things from which you're not allowed to derive any benefit. The most common one being in modern Judaism, or one that pertains throughout the year, is basar b'chalav. Right? Meat and milk combinations are not just forbidden to eat, you're not allowed to derive any benefit from it, such that if you mix meat and milk accidentally in your kosher kitchen in a way that the rabbi renders it, this is treif. Okay, the ratio was wrong, there was too much meat, there was too much milk, there's a forbidden combination. You can afterwards take your cheeseburger or take your beef chowder and feed it to Fido. Forbidden to do that. You're not allowed to, if you have a wood-burning fireplace at home, you can't feed the flames of your fire. You're not allowed to derive any benefit whatsoever from it. And that's true of Chametz on Pesach as well. Chametz on Pesach is not just asa b'achila, it's asa b'hana. Not allowed to derive any benefit from it, which is why when you buy a Pesach guide, a Pesach book, they'll have a whole list of cosmetics that are forbidden on Pesach. Why should cosmetics be forbidden on Pesach? What's wrong with cosmetics? I'm not eating the cosmetics, I'm applying it to my face. You may be applying it to your face, but that's a benefit. That's a usage. And that's forbidden on Pesach too. But here's the rub. We're learning now the negative commandment of the Torah, colloquially known as Bal Yorah, Bal Yamatzeh, two companion commandments, shall we call them, which basically means leaven shall not be seen and leaven shall not be found. which basically the Gemara interprets the confluence of these two mitzvahs to mean you're not allowed to own it on Pesach. Besides you're not allowed to eat it, and besides the fact that you're not allowed to derive any benefit from it, neither are you allowed to own it. But if I'm not allowed to use it, I'm no longer the owner. If that's what we limit ownership to. If the definition of ownership is something that I can derive benefit from, something that I can use without another's license, without another's permission. So by definition, I cannot own that which is not usable by me. So it's a catch-22. If as soon as Pesach night falls, all leavened bread becomes forbidden to use, and we say that you only transgress this sin of Bali Rabbi Matzeh for Chametz that you own, so I don't own it. And the truth is, there's no solution to that particular conundrum. About this, the Talmud says, there are three things that really are not in the domain and not in the ownership of a human being, but the Torah placed them into his ownership. In other words, against will in a certain sense, against logic. It's yours, whether you like it or not, whether you can use it or not. We're looking at it as yours, and one of them is Chametz on Pesach. The other two is only going to get us off onto a very far tangent. Okay, so that's point number one to remember, that if you don't do any ameliorative steps before Pesach, you don't physically rid yourself of the Chametz, you don't sell it to a non-Jew, you don't physically destroy it, which we do by burning Chametz, you're not mevatel it b'leiv, you don't renounce ownership of it, right? So you can't just rely on the fact of, well, when night falls tonight, I won't be able to use it anyway, so it's no longer mine. The old Jewish innate Talmudic logic. Drayim to grab a finger, you go like this with your thumb, I'm off the hook. You're not off the hook. You're on the hook. For Chametz, you didn't take any of those other three steps, you're on the hook for that kind of Chametz. Fine. But there are other elements to ownership that are not so obvious as usage. Parenthetically, before I move away from this, that happens to be a universal rule in halacha, that isurei hana, things that are indeed forbidden in usage, are worthless. Not only are they ownerless, they're worthless. Right? You cannot be mekadesh an isha with a cheeseburger. You can't acquire a woman's hand in marriage with a cheeseburger. Right? Or with the ayin nesach, or the wine that's been poured as a libation to an idol. Or with chametz on Pesach. Anything that's asa b'hana, anything that you, even if you paid good money for it, it's now worthless to you, it's worthless to her, it's worthless. It has no shavius, it has no monetary value in the eyes of halachic law. Okay. Here's some other elements, though, of ownership that are perhaps not so obvious. Okay? When something is destroyed, right, whose estate took a hit? The owner's estate. Right? There's an act of God, a lightning bolt comes down and incinerates my gold bullion. Okay? I had, what's gold now? $1,100 an ounce. I had 100 ounces of gold. I had $100,000, right? And it fell off an ocean liner or something like that. And it's irretrievable. Right? It's my loss. I didn't get to use it. I didn't have that to ask anyone permission to use it. The point is, whose loss is it? So, okay. If it's the owner's loss, fine. It's just another way of saying I was able to use it before. Yes or no? Where this becomes a question is in what we call the Parsha of Shomrim. When you have guardians. And Allah recognizes the 4 different categories of guardians. Okay? And those guardians are what we call chayev b'achriyusan. They take responsibility for compensation if the thing is lost, stolen, damaged. They're varying depending on what kind of a guard you are. There are various levels of responsibility. The catch-all phrase is chayev b'achrayus. You have liability for responsibility, meaning responsibility to make a compensation if the thing is lost. Right? So that's an argument in the Gemara, if that is considered ownership. Right? The official name of that machlok is something called davar hagarem l'mammon kamaman dami or lav kamaman dami. Something that causes monetary, parenthetically, loss, the loss of something, is that considered mammon property or isn't it? Right? So if you hold davar hagayim l'mamon k'mamon dami, that would mean that if Reuven says to Shimon, listen, I'm going on a Pesach cruise, I'm going to hear Rabbi Heimlich Himmelfarb at the Waikiki Hilton. He'll be with us a whole yontif. I'll give a lot of stimulating shiurim. Okay? So I'm giving you my $50 worth of chametz. Be a good lad. I'll need it back. I'm on an all-pasta diet. And no doubt I'll be losing some weight at the Waikiki Hilton. They only have a 4-star gourmet chef this year. They don't have a 15-star gourmet chef. So I'll need to pack on the pounds when I come back. Make sure my pasta is intact. Do you agree? Yes, I agree. Right? That guy's called a shimer. If you hold davar hagayim l'mamon k'mamon dami, if you hold that something that causes a financial loss, I have no use. I'm a shomer chinam. I can't eat it on Pesach. Can't use it on Pesach. All right? But I'm the one who's out. If it's $50 worth of pasta and the pasta gets incinerated, all right? He's not going to be out for $50. He's covered. Reuven, me, Shimon, the guy Nebuch was left back in Flushing while he's frolicking in Waikiki. All right? I'm the one who's going to have to pay for it. It's going to be my loss. That could be, according to one opinion, that's an element of ownership. All right? Another thing that we spoke about was this. Another feature or litmus test of ownership is you decide when the ownership stops and how it stops. Meaning, as an owner of something, I can decide to will it to a particular person, to sell it, to give it, to put it out on the curb for garbage collection. Okay? Disposal, how to dispose, when to dispose, to whom to dispose, that's also a feature of ownership. Agreed? All right? Isn't that something when I own property? Isn't that one of the things? I'm not using it anymore. I'm transferring title. I'm giving it away. Yes.
You may not own it, but you have care, custody, and control of it. So it's you have certain responsibility towards the item, even though you don't own it.
What do you mean?
If it's in your possession.
I'm not talking about geographical location. Okay, I'm moving away now from the case of the shomer, the guardsman with Reuven and Shimon. Just a single owner. Okay, I own. Think of anything: real estate, a Ming Dynasty vase, a box of matzah, a loaf of chametz. All right. One of the features of ownership, of owning something, is I decide when, how, and to whom to give it or sell it away. Correct? Okay. Now, what happens if I can give you a tzir, a picture, a scenario of where that's all I own in the thing? I'm not allowed to use it, but it's me who decides who to give it to. Is that ownership or not? I'll give you a perfect example. Okay? There are many mitzvahs of the Torah that govern an agrarian society. Okay? When Jews were farmers in the land of Israel, today, thank God, with the renaissance of Jewish civilization in the land of Israel, a lot of these mitzvahs have made a big time comeback. When I'm a farmer in the land of Israel, I've got to tithe my property. I've got to give away some to the Levites, some to the impoverished people, some to the Kohanim. One of the famous gifts is Truma. Okay? Truma is the part of your crop that you separate for the express purpose of giving away to Kohanim. Okay? I've got to give it away. I can't use it. I can't eat it. Okay? If I were to burn it or otherwise expropriate it, okay, it's a question of who would be the plaintiff in the lawsuit. Okay? If I haven't given it to a Kohen yet. But I am a thief. I don't own it. However, I do retain this one feature of ownership in it. I decide which Kohen to give it to. It's not like today we have the IRS where there's a middleman, a central bureaucracy. You pay your taxes, and the IRS decides which social welfare programs and military programs to disperse the funds to. It doesn't work that way. There's no middleman. Every farmer in Israel who separates Truma decides which Kohen he's giving it to. Okay? So, now let's say a friend of mine is not a Kohen himself, right? But he's got a nephew who's a Kohen. His sister married a Kohen, and he's very fond of this nephew. So he comes over to me. My nephew, the salesman, my nephew, the seafaring merchant, he's not a farmer. I says, hey, listen, Leibish, I heard you had a bumper crop this year. You have 100 bushels of wheat for Truma to give away. Huh? How about you give it to my nephew, Barry Kagan, the Kohen? 100 bushels. Okay, you want me to give it to Barry? Okay, that'll be $10,000. Says $10,000? What kind of a ripoff? You couldn't sell it for that much on the open commodities market. It's only worth $5,000. Says okay, 5,000 is fine. But you don't understand. You don't own it. You've got to give it away anything. Anyway, you can't sell it. You're right. Okay, how about $5 to steer it towards Barry, your nephew? Okay, now you're talking. Okay. Then another friend, another neighbor comes by and says, 1 second. I have a nephew, Dovid Katz. I'll give you $10 for it. Whatever. They'll bid to a certain amount, and at which point they'll say, hey, look, it's ridiculous already. It's like you're charging us the wholesale price for it. That we're not going to pay. But to give you a pittance, to give you a small, tip, if you will, for steering it a certain way, okay, that's a saleable right. The question is that considered ownership?
Are you allowed to do that?
What? Yes, it's allowed.
Really?
Yes.
But if you're getting something back, are you giving it a true 10%? In a sense, if maybe
Right.
only giving you but 9%.
First of all, you're conflating two ideas. 10% that's given to the Levites, and any amount, the smallest amount, can be given to the kind. The rule midaraisa is chita achas peteres sakri. One stalk of wheat can pater a mountain, a silo worth, a granary filled with grain. Okay, the midrabanan, their shiurim, right? They say that a cheapskate gives 1/60th. Yeah. A medium person gives 1/50th, 2%, and a really expensive guy gives 1/40th. You're not supposed to give more truma than that. All right? So, since people generally give more than 1/40th for truma, so the point is the most minuscule amount. Some of it is not being paid for, so to speak. So, yeah.
With the Levite, the 10% is still, that's also allowed? Or don't leave it there?
It's trading in Meiser is a more difficult topic, primarily because a non-Levite is also allowed to eat Meiser once the Levite receives it. A non-Kohen can never eat Truma. So it's a whole different kind of ownership or the relationship to the produce. Okay. Suffice to say, the Gemara has a question is Taivas Hana. This thing is not called Davar Garam Laman. The expression for this feature of ownership is something called Tovas Hana. Is Tovas Hana Mammon or not? Okay. So I want to ask you a question. Okay? Let's put on our thinking caps today. Believe it or not, outside the land of Israel, even to this very day, as we speak in March 2010, there is a gift that we are supposed to give Kohanim. Those of us who live in a post-industrial service economy society. All right? Does anyone know what that gift is? There's a technical difficulty why we cannot give it to the Kohen, but there is something that pretty much, if not us, then our wives, our mothers, the balabastas we know, have given this gift in the past. Let me ask the riddle a different way. Okay? There is a special bread that we eat on Shabbos. What is the name of that bread?
Challah.
Challah. Okay? Why is challah called challah? Is challah the Hebrew word for bread?
No, it's the portion.
Chametz is the Hebrew word for bread. You know how challah got the name challah?
From the
Anybody
portion
know?
that you take away and burn.
Oh,
Okay. Correct. There's a mitzvah that is performed with those, with taigalach, with those. Okay. When you need a requisite amount of dough, you have to be mafresh challah. There's a mitzvah to take off a portion and give it to whom?
Kohen.
The Kohen. Technically, we cannot give it to the Kohen because we're all tameh, we're all ritually impure. All right. And just like truma has to be eaten in a state of purity, so too does challah have to be eaten in a state of purity. It just shows you the genius, the collective genius of the Jewish people, that they had a foodstuff, they had a food item, and they wanted to give it a name. They give it a name after the potential mitzvah which could be performed with it. All right? So, the mitzvah still pertains. It's supposed to be mafresh challah. Any kosher bakery out there, okay, they took off challah because they're always needing those in large quantities. They take off challah. In the old bakeries, before Kemach Yashan was all the vogue, that was the thing they bragged about in their signs. I remember as a kid, traditionally there were two signs in a kosher bakery. Never even said the word kosher. It said Shomer Shabbos, One got a thing that the baker said, and some of them said Yish challah shein genumen.
Yeah.
Challah was taken already.
Yeah.
You don't have to take off the challah. We took care of the challah. So challah has to be taken, has to be separated. Technically, excuse me 1 second, I have something caught in my mouth. Technically, because it is tamei, now it has to be burned. Cannot be given to the kohen, but the rest of the dough, or the bread as the case may be, would not be kosher, would not be fit for our consumption, for non-kohen consumption, unless challah was taken. As a matter of fact, it's not fit for kahanim to eat either. It's a separate, it's called tevel. That's before truma and challah is taken. Okay. So now, before we get to the Minchas Chinuch, let me share with you a conundrum that the Mishnah Pesachim has. Oops, wrong Masechta. That's Kedusha, not Pesachim. We may or may not need that a little bit later tonight. Okay, there's a Mishnah, begins at the bottom of Memvav Amadal 46a in Masechta Pesachim. And it asks the question as follows. Keitzad mafrisha challah betuma b'yomtiv. How does one separate challah in a state of tumah? Very contemporary speaking. In the times of the Mishnah, at least in the times of the early Tanaim, I'm not 100% sure. It's topical. This week's Parsha, Parshas Para. There was something called Para Aduma. There was still the halachic means for purification from exposure to dead people. We don't have that anymore today. So all of us, having once attended a funeral in our lives, or walked under, or gone into a funeral chapel, or even walked under the awning of a funeral parlor, are what's known as Tamei Mesim. We're all ritually impure through exposure to the dead, and we have no antidote anymore for it today. So, in a state of Tumah, right, how do you separate challah on Yontif? Person's a do-it-yourselfer. They're running short on matzah, and they're baking new matzah on Pesach itself. So, then, you can't make matzah without kneading the dough. You need the dough, and you need enough dough, right, that you've got to take off challah. How do you do that? That's the question in Mishnah. Now, before I tell you the answer, which is actually a three-way argument between three Tanaim, three authors of the Mishnah, can anyone analyze why this presents a problem? Why should it be a problem to be mafresh challah on Yontif, on the Yontif of Pesach? Can anyone see a problem here?
This is for the additional that you're making? Did you say something you're making in a second batch? And
you bake matzah. I presume most people bake matzah before Pesach.
Right.
Some people have a custom to bake their matzahs Erev Pesach afternoon, because that's a memory of the Paschal offering that had to be slaughtered at that time. All right? But generally speaking, in contemporary Judaism, I don't know of anyone who bakes matzah on Pesach. But strictly speaking, then you could bake matzah on Pesach. So yeah, I just gave the standard scenario. You're baking matzah on Pesach because you ran out. You don't have enough. You need more matzah. So you're baking matzah on Pesach. Well, if you're baking matzah on Pesach, you're kneading a dough. If you're kneading a dough, you're supposed to take off challah. What's the problem with that? Why does the Mishnah have to ask, how do you do it on Yontif? I don't know, I'll do it on Yontif like I do it on a weekday. I know the technique. When you have this amount of dough, you break off some of the dough, you make the bracha, and finished. I was mafresh challah. Why is it problematic now? Do you know why it's problematic?
Timing.
Yeah, what's wrong with the timing? You're right.
Timing.
Is the timing, when you say timing, do you mean because it's a holiday? You mean specifically because it's the holiday of Pesach, Passover?
Timing of making the matzah.
Yeah, tell me what's wrong with the timing.
You're spending some of your time separating the dough.
Right.
And you're affecting the timing of the time the matzah gets from the time it's kneaded and put into the oven to finished product.
Oh, okay, I hear what you're saying. Very good, excellent. Okay, he's raising a very good point. In other words, you're on a very tight schedule from the moment water hits flour, okay, till the time that the bread is baked. This has to be less than 18 minutes. That's the definition of matzah. 18 minutes and 1 second, it's chametz. Okay. So he's saying the problem is that the extra time that you're taking to be mafresh the challah, to separate some dough, right, that can make the difference between chametz and matzah. Excellent. On the ball.
Why would that be different when they first make it 2 months ago? They still do the same thing.
Okay. Good point. Right? We'll get to it in a second. You said very good, but he's asking a very good question. Any other problems anyone can think of? Let's get more basic, okay? When was the last time you saw a balabasta, a lady for a whole year makes her own challah for Shabbos? Doesn't buy in the bakery, she makes her own challah. You ever see anyone baking challah Saturday morning?
No,
Why not? Why not?
You can't light a fire on Shabbos.
Okay. If you could light a fire, if the fire was lit before Shabbos, she could bake challah on Shabbos?
No, you can't make you can't create something on Shabbos as far as cooking.
There are many avos malachas, there are many Torah level categories of creative activity that one transgresses and one would be considered a Shabbos desecrator if they were to bake bread on Shabbos. Okay? Lisha, the making of a dough, is a chil Shabbos, even if you didn't take another step. Baking it, throwing it into the oven. Okay? But a holiday is different. Right? People cook on holidays. Right? However, right, the rule is Melechus ochel nefesh is mutar yontav. Any step that you require in food preparation for food that's going to be eaten on the holiday, that's what you're allowed to do on the holiday. Right? But you cannot cook on a holiday for the next day, which will be a weekday. As a matter of fact, even when you have a holiday coming out on a Friday, and you need to cook for the next day, which is Shabbos, because you can't cook on Shabbos, we have a mechanism called an Erev Tashilin, which allows you to do so. Right? But strictly speaking, if it's not going to be consumed on the holiday, then it's just the same desecration of the holiday as cooking or baking or kneading or any of that stuff on Shabbos would be desecration of Shabbos. Okay. So here's the conundrum of being mafresh challah on Yom Tif B'tumah. Okay? The challah itself, okay, what are you going to do with the challah? You can't give it to the kohen. It's tameh. Okay? You can't bake it to prevent it from coming chametz. Let's say you're doing this very early in the process. You're a speed demon. Okay? You've kneaded the water and the flour together, and you're only 5 minutes into the process. Okay? You're going to make it ahead of the finish line. You got 5 minutes to spare. It takes you 30 seconds to break off a piece of dough and pronounce the bracha. Okay? So your concern is not a concern. All right? What are you going to do now with the broken off piece of dough? You're going to give it. You're going to bake it?
No.
You can't bake it.
Put it aside.
Why can't you bake it? No? How about you? Do you know why you can't bake it? Think for a minute. The part that you broke off to give to the kohen, why can't you bake it? Are you going to bake the rest of the matzah? You're going to bake the lion's share that you left over for yourself. That you're going to bake. Why can't you bake the what you're going to give to the kohen? Can you eat it? You're a non-kohen. Can the kohen eat it? It's tameh. So you can't bake it. It's useless. It's not going to be consumed on Yom Tov. What heter do you have to bake it? Right? The lisha part, the mixing the water and flour together, that was allowed because you hadn't designated any as challah yet. Right? So in theory, you could have eaten all of this. But once you break off some to be given to the kohen, you yourself can't eat it because you're a non-kohen. The kohen can't eat it because it's tameh. So you're not allowed to bake it. Okay, so I won't bake it. I'll let it sit there. Let it sit there, it'll become chametz. That's a little bit of a problem on Pesach. What?
No chametz allowed.
No chametz allowed. So it's a conundrum. Right? It's a problem. Okay. Parenthetically, before I read you the answers of the Mishnah, I want to address the argument that you gentlemen had. The common practice in matzah bakeries today, if you ever go into a matzah bakery and see the operation is, they do not separate challah until after the matzahs are baked. We pass like the mandamer is roidel techasal the sal, the basket, or in this case they have like these big rectangular, receptacles. that they flip the matzahs, out of the oven into, is considered a tziruf. That's considered like reintegrating it as one dough again. So you can separate challah after it's baked. Chametz the challah a whole year. I don't know how to do it in the commercial bakeries. The Weibalach, are mafresh challah when it's still a dough, right? But strictly speaking, if they would throw all of their challahs into one basket, they could take off one challah and designate it as challah and burn that, or a piece of a challah. I don't know exactly what the shear is, right? So that's the answer to your question. That's the answer to your question. In common practice, the way it's done today, even 2 months before Pesach, right? Because of your concern, because they're on a very tight schedule and they're trying to maximize every 18-minute run.
I should have known. I baked shmurd matzah 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so do you remember?
Yeah.
They usually
came up from the ovens.
Right, they ask somebody usually from the Chabur. On the finished matzahs, on the baked matzahs.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let me read and translate for you a Mishnah in Psachim and Vav Malv. How do you separate challah that's tamei on yontif? You got a conundrum. You're darned if you do, you're darned if you don't. Right? If you bake it, you're not allowed to bake it. You're desecrating, generically, you're desecrating a holiday, any holiday. Could be Shavuos, could be Rosh Hashanah. Any of the holidays you're allowed to bake on, but you're only allowed to bake stuff that's going to be eaten today. This is not going to be eaten by anyone. Not by non-Kahanim and not by Kahanim. Right? So what are you going to do? Just let it stay? Let it stay, it becomes Chametz. That presents a host of problems. Or does it? We're going to see. Rabbi Lod's solution is the contemporary practice that matzah bakeries do today. Bake it first, right? And then separate it and call it challah. So the baking was allowed, cause in theory and potential, any of this stuff could be eaten by non-Kahanim, right? And after the baking, I should say, when you separate it, that's not a malach on Yontif. That's not one of the 39 prohibited categories of work, separating things or designating names for things. So bake first, separate second. That's Rabbi Elazar's approach. Ben Beseira Eimer, Tatel B'tzaynin. Ben Beseira says, you take it off when it's still a dough, and you immediately throw it into cold water, and you keep it in cold water until such time when you are allowed to burn it, because that arrests the chimutz, that arrests the leavening process. Okay, if you take dough and you throw it into cold water, then it can survive as matzah for longer than 18 minutes. Okay, don't try this at home, kids. Okay, exactly how much extra time you have, how they had refrigeration methods for the water in the ancient world, I'm not 100% sure. But
nowadays,
this
you
is
put it in the freezer, wouldn't raise
possibly. Okay. Like I said, we're not learning halacha l'maisa, and don't try this at home, kids. I'm Rabbi Yeshua. Loi zehu chametz shemusharin alav beval yira val yamatzei. This is not the chametz that we were warned by the Torah. Do not find it, do not see it, do not let it be found, do not let it be seen. The mitzvahs that we're learning tonight. Ela mafrishasa. Don't do anything funky. Don't do anything unusual. Do what you normally do. Separate it when it's still a dough. You let it sit there until the evening when you're allowed to burn things. It's Chalamayid. It's no longer the holiday. You're allowed to burn things on Chalamayid. If it becomes Chametz, it becomes Chametz. Alright? So we have 3 approaches to how to deal with this conundrum, this halachic challenge of being mafresh challah. Now, the sheet here that's most intriguing to me is the last one. What do you think Rabbi Yeshua means when he says this is not the chametz that you're commanded not to have, not to own? Why would that be the case?
Because it's already consecrated before, and you don't own it when it's consecrated.
Exactly, precisely. Okay, we learned, those of you who were here last week, remember we learned, I said over the drasha. Okay. The Torah emphasized, "Lo yeira lecha chametz, v'lo yimatzel lecha sa'ar b'chol gvulecha." It shall not be found to you. From which we derive, "Shel chayi ataraya, aval ataraya shel gavaya v'shel akum." You're not allowed to see / possess your own chametz, but chametz that is not yours, you're allowed to possess. What is chametz? It's not yours. If it belongs to Hegdish, to the estate of God, as it were, the holy temple, right? Or if it's a non-Jews, that's where our whole heter for verschreibung the chametz, going to the Rav, signing off your chametz. He's your agent, your sales agent, to sell your chametz to a guy. What do you mean? Geographically, it's still located in my house. It's not a question of geography. It's a question of ownership. If the non-Jew owns it, I don't. If I don't, proximity, close geographical proximity is not the problem. The problem is ownership. If I own something, if it's 1,000,000 miles away, if it's a half a globe away, I transgress the sin. And if I don't own it, it could be 2 inches. It could be right under my nose. And I don't transgress the sin. So, this is arguably, as Ed pointed out, a form of Hegdish. It's not exactly Hegdish. It's not saying this chametz is consecrated to God, right? But the fact is that it's designated as a gift to the Kohen. I no longer own it, right? So once it's designated as a gift to the Kohen and I no longer own it, therefore, the fact that it may, without being dunked in cold water, it may become chametz, I would say it's inevitable that it's going to become chametz, is not a problem. That's not prohibited. It's chametz. Chemically, physically, it's chametz. It's not prohibited chametz. Why? I don't own it. What do I care if the estate of God owns it, or a non-Jew owns it, or a Kohen owns it? I don't own it. What?
No, I'm saying it's not yours anymore.
Right. Okay. Fine. At long last, let's learn a little Minchat Chinuch here tonight. Okay. Let me see which one we're doing. Okay. I believe this is paragraph number 6, which is page 2 on your handout. Yeah. Okay. Well, the Chametz shel Hegdish. Okay, you have page 2 on your handout. Those of you from the world of TorahAnytime.com, this is page Ayin Gimel in the Minchat Yerushalayim Minchat Chinuch. Okay, the second paragraph on the page. In our numbering system, it's paragraph 6. Well, the Chametz shel Hegdish, Chametz that is Hegdish, Chametz that belongs to the estate of the Holy Temple. That means, how does something become Hegdish? Very simple. You declare it to be Hegdish. You declare it to be consecrated. The person has a pile of bread, and he says, Lechem zu l'gavoah, Lechem zu l'Hashem, Lechem zu l'Hegdish. A lot of different euphemisms you can use, but the idea of all of them is that you're designating this bread is something I'm consecrating, I'm donating to God. Now, if it wouldn't be Pesach, or Erev Pesach, it would be a normal time of the year, the Gizber, the treasury, or the office of the treasury of the Beis HaMikdash, would take your bread, convert it to cash, and use the money for some usage in the Beis HaMikdash, building supplies, cleaning, gardening, landscaping. There are all kinds of needs that are required to run a temple in Jerusalem. There's something we call kosher bedek habayis, things that are not consecrated for sacrificial use, but things that are consecrated for their monetary worth. Okay? So, Minchat Chinuch says as follows: according to the texts that we have in the Gemara and Psachim that follows the Mishnah I just read, Rabbi Eliezer Sover Chala Yisrael Over B'Bal Yirah Machmas Hayel V'Bay Mitchell. Okay, so like I said, there are 3 solutions in the Mishnah of how to be mafresh challah b'tumah b'yontiv. How do I separate challah when we're all tamei? How do I do that on a holiday? Right? Is each opinion in the Mishnah just trying to outsmart the next guy? They're just offering multiple choice? No. There's a machlekes, there's an argument. There's a halachic argument going on in the Mishnah, which is the correct way. And depending on what your theoretical opinion is, that translates into your practical solution to the problem. So the Gemara says as follows: Rabbi Eliezer, who said that you should bake it first, right, holds that there's a problem with separating it while it's still a dough. What's the problem? Who was the last one? I'm sorry. The last shita was Rabbi Shua. Rabbi Shua was the one who separated his dough. What's wrong with that? Right? He says as follows: Hayel v'Bay Mitchell. The thing is like this. Okay? Anyone here ever said Hataras Nadarim on Erev Rosh Hashanah? Okay, what's that all about? What do we do when we're doing Ataras Nadam? You know? What are we doing when we do Ataras Nadam?
Releasing ourselves from any vows that we made inadvertently or on purpose.
Okay. But do you say it in isolation or you say it with some company?
Yeah,
quorum.
Not a quorum, 3 people. Okay, what do we need the 3 people for? What's the function of the 3 people? Taxes about, no, not witnesses. The witnesses would be 2 people. All right? 3 people is a bezdin. Right? The rule is a bezdin of Gimel Edyaitis, or even a Yachid Mumcha, an expert in the laws of vows, has the power to retroactively uproot vows. Okay? There's mistakenly, it's very often translated in Allah Siddurim as annulment of vows. Annulment, I'm not a great philologist, but I always understood the word annulment in English to mean something from this point in time going forward. Okay? The whole legal theory behind, I should say, Hataras Nadarim, is that it works retroactively. It comes out that you were never under this vow to start with. Now, this is true, not just of vows, I will eat bananas, I won't eat bananas, I will walk 5 miles a day, I won't walk 5 miles a day. Okay? It's also true of vows that consecrate things. Anything that is designated bepeh, whether I say, Bessie the cow should be a peace offering, right? Whether I point to some of my wheat stalks that have been harvested and I say, that's truma that's going to the kain. Or whether I, the balabusta in the kitchen, after making enough dough, say, this I'm separating for challah, that's going to the kain. Okay? All of those are things that happen, what we call kedushas peh. They're all forms of the dharm, they're all forms of vows and verbal donations. And all of them are subject to she'ela, to asking a chacham, petitioning a wise man or a bezdin to retroactively uproot it. So Rabbi Eliezer says, you say that they should separate challah. You, Rabbi Yeshua, say they should separate challah while it's still in its dough stage, before it's baked. And we don't care if it becomes chametz, because if it becomes chametz, it's ownerless chametz. I don't own it. 1 second. What happens if you go to a chacham, for whatever crazy cockamamie reason you would want to do this, okay? But we're talking about a potential over it. Potentially, if I would so desire, let's say a diamond, if you want, just to rationalize it a little bit, let's say a diamond fell into that punkt, precisely that little 4 ounces of dough that I separated off and I was going to give to the kain. All right, well, I want my diamond back, so we'll find another 4 ounces of dough to give to the kain. In the meantime, I want to retroactively uproot that I designated this for the kain.
But can't you go and say something like, Hashem caused it to fall at that moment, so obviously it should be going. If the second you designate it, time it just happens to go in.
You could if you were a big tzaddik with better business ethics than the average bear. Okay, but strictly speaking, theoretically, if chametz would not be an issue, there is nothing halachically that would prevent you from doing that. Okay, the truth of the matter is that what I'm saying is silly, because the diamond probably still belongs to you. You donated the dough. You didn't donate, fortunes that were secreted within the dough. Okay, so that's. But whatever. I'm just trying to make it more, intellectually appealing. Why the word? I can understand if a guy designated $1,000 cow, to bring as a sacrifice, and now he's feeling cheap. And, he's having a cash flow problem. His other cow died from mad cow disease. He's thinking better of it. I can understand why a guy would be shayel neder, would try to, retroactively uproot his donation, right? But for chametz, for challah, for a little piece of dough, I don't care about the reason. What I'm interested in over here is the potential. Not me, Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, Hayel, v'ibay mitchell alei. Since if he would want to, he could ask a sheilos chacham, he could go to a chacham and have the vow, have the donation, the verbal designation uprooted retroactively, and then it will become his again. We look at it as if it's already his. So that's the kind of chametz that you would transgress the prohibition on Pesach for. Okay, let's read on. Again, back to paragraph 6. Rashi is not fond of this text of the Gemara. He actually wants to do a textual amendation. He can't understand this. What's his question, Rashi? He says he can't understand why the fact that a person has the potential to be an Indian giver, as it were, to undo his donation to the Kohen, why that should change the present state of affairs. Huh? Taisus asked the question even sharper. Rashi doesn't realize it. He says, it just doesn't make sense to me. He doesn't have a question. He says, it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem logical to me that the fact that a person could potentially reinstate his ownership, that we're going to look at it as if he owns it now. The fact of the matter is, he gave it away to the Kohen. He designated it for giving away to a Kohen. Not to the Kohen, not to any particular Kohen, but he designated it for giving away to a Kohen. Right? Taisus asked the question much sharper. Hagdish is also reversible. Yeah? If I have loaves of bread, right, and I consecrate them to God, for Kayanim, right, the bread that I left over for myself, after being Ma'afresh, I gave what I had to give to the Kayan, or I burnt what I had to burn because it was Batuma. I couldn't give it to a Kayan. All the breads, all the loaves of bread that are left over, right? If I say on Erev Pesach, these are Kodesh LaHashem, I'm donating these to the temple, they're consecrated to God, right? I'm allowed to keep those loaves of bread on Pesach. Okay? That's the classic case of the Gemara case. The classic reading by the Talmud of the verse of the Torah, Lo Yero Lecha, you shall not see. What does the Lecha mean? You, it's got to be yours. What's a case of not yours? Chametz that was consecrated. Chametz that I donated to God. Says Taisus, what do you mean? You donated to God? That's also a verbal donation. That's also something you could go to a Chacham to. Now, I don't know about the Minchat Chinuch. When I looked up at the Taisus, he said a little bit differently. He said you could be paid it, you could redeem it. Instead of waiting for the treasurer of the Beis HaMikdash to pick up your loaves of bread and sell them in a bakery, open market, and convert them to money, you can convert them to money yourself. And then the Kedusha, then the consecration gets transferred onto the coins. Right? But the bottom line is, there are methods to undo it. Yeah, whether it's going to a Chacham, or Pidyon, or redemption, there are ways to undo it. So if I look at potential ways to undo it, as if they're done already, and therefore I do own the Chametz, then Hagdish, there should also not be a loophole. Hagdish should also not be a way out from transgressing this mitzvah of Le'er Lecha Chametz. And the Talmud clearly states that it is. Selling it to the guy, or consecrating it on high, those are ways to get around the sin of owning Chametz on Pesach. Right? So you don't understand what this Ibaya Mitchell business is. Taisa says a bombshell. Okay? Taisa says that the heter, the dispensation, the allowance, the license, to physically, geographically be close to Chametz that you've already given away and consecrated to the temple is only if the treasurer came and picked it up and took physical possession of it. Because after that, the rule is, now you can no longer be an Indian giver. Now you can't take it back. Once it comes into the treasury's hands, the temple treasury's hands, he'll sell it on the open market. You're not redeeming it anymore. If you're redeeming it, you're no different than any other new buyer. Okay? You can't redeem it. You can't go to a Chacham and say, I changed my mind. I don't want to have to pay money for it. I need these challahs. Whatever the technique is of a Chacham retroactively undoing it. Okay. The Shagasaya has an answer to Rashi's question. He says, even though in other Talmudic applications we're not going to say the idea that you can bring it back into your ownership, to look at it as if now you own it, right? Even where you makabel achrayas, okay? The case I gave you of Reuven traveling to Waikiki and Shimon staying behind in Flushing being a shomer, being his guardsman. You didn't sell it to a guy. You gave it for babysitting, for chametz sitting to your neighbor Jew, Shimon. Okay? That's something called kibbul ol achrayis. The after b'chol makom davar agar l'mamen lav k'mamen dami. Kan shayim. Says, the Torah is stricter, or maybe more lenient, depending on how you want to look at it, in terms of the laws of ownership when it comes to chametz, than it is in other applications of rules of ownership. In that classic, universal, all over Shas, with countless applications, argument, davar agar l'mamen k'mamen dami lav k'mamen dami, is something that causes monetary loss. The scenario I just gave you, when you have a guard who will take the hit in the wallet, in the pocketbook, if the thing gets lost or destroyed. Not the true, quote-unquote, owner. Okay? Is that considered ownership or not? So we paskin in many, many different applications all over Shas. We paskin, the ruling is, no, it's not considered ownership. If a shomer, if a guard, we wouldn't be talking about Chametz on Pesach. I'm going away for 2 weeks, I have a scarlet macaw, can you watch it for me? Feed it, give it a little light, a little air every day. I want my scarlet macaw when I come back. Sure, no problem. I'll take responsibility for it. Okay? You give the scarlet macaw to a woman and you say, with this scarlet macaw I do thee wed, I consecrate thee to me according to the laws of Moses and Sinai. Doesn't work. Moses and Israel, doesn't work. The fact that you potentially could take a monetary hit, that's not considered that you own the thing. But when it comes to chametz, it is. I can't be the guard for another Jew's chametz on Pesach. As a matter of fact, it may not even be that I could be the guard for a non-Jew's chametz on Pesach if I take financial responsibility for it. If I guarantee the guy that if it's lost, I'll compensate you. Right? That's considered ownership for chametz on Pesach. Right? If you remember at the beginning of the class, I said, in general, I shouldn't own any chametz on Pesach because it becomes asabana, becomes forbidden to use, that's worthless in halacha. And yet, if I don't physically destroy a chametz, if I don't renounce ownership, if I don't sell it to the guy, I do transgress this mitzvah. So I said that's, I don't know what to call legal fiction. The Torah put it into your ownership, even though strictly speaking it's not your ownership. So, for the chumrah of chametz, if you will, for being strict about chametz, there's leniencies in the ownership rules. Right? Says the Shagas, oh, this is another one. Right? Of course we wouldn't say, in general, in other applications, that the fact that you have potential to go to a chacham and be mat neder, be shoyal on your neder, or the fact that you could go to the gizber and redeem something, to get it back as an Indian giver after you've given it away already, of course I wouldn't say that that's ownership. But when it comes to Chametz and Pesach, we see precedents where we're more lenient, so to speak, about ownership in order to be more strict about having Chametz around. Says the Shagasai, that's the answer to Rashi's question. The Komakam Kan Gabi Chametz, the Hafa Kabbalah Sachrayas over Mikra Lo Yimatzei, the Hafa B'chol Makam Davar Galamam and Lav Kamam and Dami Kan Shine. Here it's different. Im Kain, if so, Hegdish Nami Hol Mitchell Hava Kadavar Galamam, the Iver Olav. So it comes out according to Shagasai that our conception of Hegdish that you consecrated would be like pre-Taisus. No, it doesn't have to come into the hands of a gizber, of a treasurer of the Beis HaMikdash. As soon as you designate something as consecrated, right? I'm sorry, the other way around. When it comes, not just to challah, not just when it comes to challah, you could be shayl a chacham. When it comes to hegdish, you could also be shayl by a chacham. You could also be mataneder. So you would transgress owning chametz. Okay, just very quickly, let's look ahead because it's a long mitzvah and I was not going to get to anything. Look at page 6 of your handout, the upper left-hand corner, number 43, paragraph 43. For those of you on Torah anytime, this is Daf Ayin Zion, the left-hand column on top. Vayim b'tzlach p'sachim hayam abeis b'sugya the goy sheifkid. Tzlach is one of the great achronish commentaries, also known as the The author of the tzlach is more famously known for his classic of responsa literature, the Noda B'Yehuda. The same rabbi who wrote the Rabbi Landau, who wrote the Noda B'Yehuda, wrote the tzlach. Okay, anyway. Tzlach P'sach Mehmet, that is Sugi the Gaisha Hifkid is talking about this scenario I gave you before, where it's not the Jew going away for Passover to Waikiki, it's a non-Jew going away for whatever reason, just happens to be on Passover, and he gives you his chametz, right? But with achrayas, you're going to have to pay me back if you lose it. All right? Shapil Baruch B'din Hagdish, Shechai B'achri Yusei. He's got a long discourse over there, a long pilpul, about comparing and contrasting chametz strictly owned by the guy that you took responsibility for, or hegdish that you have responsibility for. If in that case, you'd be over on Bal Yirah. Okay, so even though normally we say that once you consecrate it, it's not yours anymore, and you can have close physical proximity, and you will not be transgressing these mitzvahs. If you have responsibility to replace it, that's different. Now, I just want to say, I did not look up the tzlach in preparation for this year, but I'll just tell you, it's just a good general piece of data to keep in mind. How it applies to chametz, I'll use my imagination. But, what's the difference? There are two terms in the Torah in regards to animal sacrifices. One is called a neder, and one is called a nedava. What's the difference between a neder and a nedava? Says the Gemara. A nedava is, you're working with your animals in the corral one day, you see a particularly fine looking goat, or sheep, or cow, and you say, Harei zu la'olah, Harei zu l'shlamim. This animal, I want this animal to be a peace offering, to be a burnt offering, whatever kind of offering you consecrate it is, boom, presto changeo, it's now consecrated, you can't milk it anymore, you can't shear it anymore, get it to the temple post haste, and sacrifice it. What happens if something happens to the animal? The animal drops dead, the animal gets gored by an ox, the animal gets a physical defect, a blemish, that makes it invalid to be brought as an offering in the temple. What's the rule in that case? Do I have to substitute it? Do I have to replace it?
I think you have to substitute it.
So, it all depends on the mode of consecration and the words, the verbiage that the guy used when he consecrated the animal. If he said, Harei zu la'olah, Harei zu l'shlamim, this animal should be a peace offering, this animal should be a burnt offering, it's this animal. If this animal is unfit, you're off the hook. You have no achrayas, you have no responsibility. If you said, Harei olai olah, at first you said, I'm accepting upon me to sacrifice a burnt offering. I'm accepting upon myself to sacrifice a peace offering.
That's a vow.
And then you go into your corral and say, this looks like a nice candidate, let's take Bessie the cow. If Bessie the cow plotzes, or gets a piece of her ear ripped off, or something like that, then you're responsible, you have to bring another one. So that's just know the difference between a neder and a nedava. And the nedava is where you say Harei zu, where you designate a particular animal without a prior vow. And a neder is where you accept it upon yourself. Harei olai, it's upon me. These are voluntary sacrifices. We're not talking here about obligatory sacrifices like sin offerings, like guilt offerings, right? Even though they're voluntary sacrifices, but if you worded it in a way that you said, it's upon me, it's on me to bring it, I don't care how many times it fails. You could lose 5 animals in the process, 100 animals in the process. Until you have a successful sacrifice, you're on the hook.
The annulment of the vow wouldn't...
The annulment of the vow might take care of it. But if you choose not to annul the vow, then you have that would be called kachim sheyesh la machrayis. Now how that translates into loaves of bread, I'm not quite sure. But just understand that this concept within consecrated objects, there's a difference between taking financial responsibility and not taking financial responsibility. Okay. Now, I'm just going to start number 44. We're about to be grabbed by the clock. But finally, I want to bring something into, outside the realm of theory and something into actual Hilchas Pesach. Okay, it has nothing to do really with ridding yourselves strictly of Chametz. There's something to do with davening. Does anyone know what part of Psukei d'Zimra, of the first section of davening, we delete on Pesach? As a matter of fact, we delete it even on Erev Pesach. Mizmar L'Soda. Okay, a song of thanksgiving. Why do we delete that psalm from Psukei d'Zimra on Passover? You know that one too, where you live?
Bring on the carbon toad though, which we can't bring in our Pesach.
Because
Because you can't, because Chametz is forbidden an hour Challah before Pesach begins.
okay, let me. He hit the nose on the head. Let me elaborate for you, for those who aren't familiar. Generally speaking, we're used to the concept of Chametz and Matzah 1 week a year. Us Jews who live outside the land of Israel, 8 days a year. Passover, that's when you have issues of Chametz. Obviously, there's a lot of preparation to get your house and your kitchen ready for Passover. But basically, the prohibition of Chametz is only on Passover. That's true for us privateers. Yeah? But in the times of the temple, when the temple was up and running, the prohibition of Chametz applied 365 days a year. Okay, the rule is nothing that is leaven or nothing that comes out of fruit honey, date honey, is allowed to go on the altar. So therefore, the whole category of meal offerings, as is known, there were animal sacrifices that were brought in the temple, but then there was a whole other slew of sacrifices that were brought in the temple. Meal, as in cornmeal, oatmeal, meal being another word for something that's been milled. Okay, what we would call flour. There were flour offerings that were brought in the temple. And sometimes it was raw flour, it was a flour-oil mixture, which parenthetically does not become leaven. Okay, it's only flour-water mixtures, but flour and oil does not become leaven. Right? But there were plenty of baked menachos, as they're called, meal offerings as well. All of those meal offerings, whether they were independent meal offerings, whether they were meal offerings that came as an adjunct to an animal sacrifice, had to be baked, fried, deep fried, unleavened. I bet you didn't know that you could fry matzah. A matzah donut. Yeah, there is such a thing, believe it or not. Right? Combine the best foods of Hanukkah and Pesach. Again, don't try this at home, kids. But strictly speaking, if you would deep fry something within 18 minutes, that's also matzah. It can be mushy, you can have a spongy texture. As long as it's fully cooked within 18 minutes, that's considered the matzah. Okay. Actually, I don't even know. Okay, whatever.
The Gebrooks, and that's...
We could form a business.
Pardon me?
We could form a business right now.
Possibly. Okay. I think Yemenites have cornered the market on it because they have lafa matzahs that they use. They have the soft gyro-like matzahs, yeah. Okay. At any rate, stick around after the class. I'll tell you an interesting discussion about Ashkenazi versus Sephardi matzahs in a minute. Okay.
Matzah is supposed to be?
Pardon me?
Isn't there the idea that's the way matzah is supposed to be?
Like matzah.
Save for after the class.
That's like matzah rice. Like,
Okay. I think so, but I wonder if you have my maybe I told you over already by my table on Shabbos once. Okay. At any rate, back to the issue at hand. So we got another conundrum with the carbon toda, the Thanksgiving offering. Thanksgiving offering was an animal sacrifice that was not strictly obligatory, but people who were healed from a deathly illness, who crossed an ocean, who crossed a desert, or who were released from jail, were supposed to volunteer to bring a Thanksgiving offering in temple times. In contemporary Judaism, those are the 4 categories of people who bench Gaimel, who make a Birchas HaGomel over the Sefer Torah. Again, thank God, most of us have not escaped, from life-threatening illnesses or life-threatening accidents. You hear it most often when somebody crosses the ocean on a transatlantic flight from Israel to America or vice versa. That's when you hear people make Agam most often. At any rate, the carbon toda was singular. Not that it had accessory meal offerings being brought with it, but it was the only one that had accessory meal offerings, some of which were chametz. And the ones that were chametz, no portion of them went on the altar, so you didn't have the problem with that prohibition. But it was there's one other exception to the rule, the Shtei Alechem B'Atzeres was a sacrifice, a public sacrifice that was brought on Schwartz, but again, no part of that was burnt on the altar. So here's the thing. You're not allowed to be Mevi Kachim L'Beis Absul. You can't offer sacrifices in a way that they're going to become invalid due to a time factor. If you bring a carbon toda on Erev Pesach, and you're allowed to eat a toda the day you bring it throughout the night, you're not. You're cutting short your time limit. Because if you bring it Erev Pesach in the morning, instead of having 24 hours to consume it and all the breads that came with it, you're only going to have 6 hours. By Erev Pesach at noon, you got to dispose of the lachmatah. You can't eat them anymore. So therefore, starting from Erev Pesach in the morning, you're no longer allowed to offer a carbon tide. You've got to wait till you have to postpone it till after Pesach. And obviously, throughout Pesach itself. Okay? The contemporary corollary for that is, since so much of our davening is surrogates for sacrifices, right? We daven Shacharis and Mincha to replace the perpetual sacrifice in the temple. We daven on a holiday, we daven Tfilas Musaf to replace the additional carbon Musaf that was brought in the times of the temple. So the same way the Jews, when they were allowed to sacrifice offerings, didn't do so on Erev Pesach or throughout Pesach, so do we, in contemporary Judaism, don't say the Mizmor Soda, the Psalm of Thanksgiving, on Erev Pesach or throughout Pesach either. So now listen to this. Number 44. We're only going to get a few lines in because I know some people have to go to Ma'ariv. If a person, b'diavad, he wasn't supposed to, but if a person sacrificed a Thanksgiving offering on Erev Pesach, even though l'chatchila you weren't supposed to offer it, skip the next three words. Look at the Rambam, who has a learned discussion if you did it. Do you transgress the sin that we're learning here, Bal Yorah Bal Matzah, on the chametz breads that came as accessories to the carbon tide? In other words, are they yours? They belong to you. Alright? Well, one second. I thought we said Hegdish, consecrated items don't belong to you. It's okay. Chametz that belongs to Hegdish is okay. Not so simple. Zatolim kachim kalam mamim bailim. This is the last idea I'll leave you with this evening. There are two levels of consecrated matters. There's something called kachei kachim, holy of holies, sin offerings, burnt offerings. Basically, the delineation is any kind of sacrifice for which the donor does not get to consume any part of it, that's called kachei kachim, holy of holies. Peace offerings, Thanksgiving offerings, are sacrifices where the donor, also gets part of it. There's a question if kachim kalam, after the service in the temple has been done with him, when the owner is allowed to partake of them, okay, does he regain ownership or not? That's what it would depend on. Okay? If kachim kalam is mum and bailam is considered the property of the owner after the blood has been sprinkled on the altar, so that doesn't just allow you to eat the flesh, the meat of your Thanksgiving animal, it also allows you to eat all the challah and matzah that you brought with it. Right? I shouldn't say challah. All the chametz and matzah that you brought with it. Alright? So that's the question. Is the fact that it's now permissible to eat, have you regained ownership or not? If you've regained ownership, you're going to be over on Bal Yorah Bal Matzah. If you haven't, if it's still considered Mammon Gavaya, the property of God as it were, you're just a guest at his table, so to speak, then you're not allowed to eat it. It's still chametz. The prohibition of eating chametz doesn't depend on who owns the chametz. That's a separate thing. You're not allowed to eat chametz no matter who owns it. Okay? But the Isser, the prohibition of possessing it that we're learning about tonight, that will not apply. That's my class for tonight, gentlemen. Next week we're in recess. There will be no Minchat Chinuch class, but in 2 weeks we're picking it up again. Okay, you're very welcome. Did you sign in?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Is it your first time here?
Yes.
I hope you'll come again. You run the seminars here all the time, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You have to forgive me. I know you're a customer to JHC, but I don't know your name. What's your name?
Eric Bronstein.
Eric. Okay. Fine. Please come again.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You want to, if you're not rushing out to Ma'ariv, I'll tell you my proof. The matzah should be soft. You ready?
It should be soft.
Soft. There shouldn't be cracker and brittle.
Yeah.
Matzah bride.
What does matzah bride have to do with anything? I'm talking about before it's bride. The matzah itself.
Oh.
Do you want to hear my proof? Very simple. How many of you by the Seder have a matzah maror sandwich? Everybody. It's part of the Seder. Correct. Right? I asked my Rosh Yeshiva this question one day. The word kairech does not mean sandwich. The word kairech all over Shas means to wind something. Korech gimel krichas when you're putting on tefillin. This move is called a kricha. When you're knotting tzitzis, okay, the part of the move where you're spinning it around before you tie a knot, that's called a kricha. So when they were korech matzah umar of ochel and yacha, when Hillel the elder would be korech matzah and maror and eat them together, Doesn't mean he made a sandwich. Doesn't mean he took 2 pieces of matzah. It means he wrapped the matzah around the maror and the paschal offering. How can you do that unless they're pliable? Good question. No? It's a proof that the Yemenites have it right. The Ashkenazim lost the Messiah matzah. You're supposed to have soft, bendable, foldable matzahs. I asked my Rosh Hashiva. He thought about it for a few minutes. He said, not so fast. It's not 1 second. Don't leave. It's not such a good proof. Okay, 2 seconds. He said maybe they wrapped the romaine lettuce around. You don't know what was the wrapping agent and what was the meat of the sandwich, so to speak. Maybe they wrapped the slab of the Korban Pesach around. You're right, it had to have been wrapped. But maybe the matzahs were brittle and solid. Yeah. Okay, Baruch.
From now on, I'm taking the lenient opinion and I'm making